All right, it's a new week. It is November 8th, and that means that there's a lot of new news out. A lot of stuff happened in AI this week. We're going to cover all of it. Sit tight. Let's get right into it. So the first one I want to talk about is actually a potential for a new IDE, a potential for a tool that could just totally disrupt the way that people are used to coding. Now, if you haven't heard of it, it's called Zed, and Zed is made by the founders of Atom. So Atom was a really popular open source IDE from way back in the day. You may or may not be familiar with it, but there's been a new one that they've been working on called Zed, and it's really interesting, not only from the AI perspective, but just the performance of it. So one of the biggest pros is it's written in Rust, which means that it's going to be very fast. There's no lag. You can look at the main page on it where, you know, it's like written from scratch in Rust. It's totally open source. So you can actually go to the repo and read through it and learn a whole lot from it. Has all the LLMs in it, and it's using a different pattern. And this week was the first week of me trying to use it full time in place of Cursor. Cursor is great. It's really popular, but it's very, the thing just crashes a lot. It has a lot of trouble. They've forked VS Code. They're putting a lot of stuff into that. The composer, it's great for really small pieces of work, but I find that if you're trying to feed it too much context, that it actually starts to really struggle. Another piece about it is it's collaborative. We'll talk about that. But on the AI side, actually, it kind of flips the script on how you're used to doing things. So instead of you having this composer and jamming a bunch of stuff in there and then having it rip, you actually do things a little bit differently. So we'll touch on that in a second, but it's just so fast. I really can't get over that part. And it has the ability to have these multi-buffers. So it's running at 120 frames per second. And then if you wanted to change something, you can open multiple buffers in the same file. They use the word buffer a lot, which is great. It's very close to Vim or Emacs. And you can make changes across all these places really fast. There's also the outline panel. So if I'm in a project, and this is a note-taking app, and if I'm in a project and I want to open up what this file has in it, I can do Command-Shift-B, and then it'll open up the outline. If I want to do the normal search, it's Command-Shift-F, and I can search the project with fuzzy search. And then on the right-hand side, you have this AI pane. So you'll notice it's really similar, actually, to using a playground, which I think is a great idea. So if I open up a file, let's just find one, maybe this index file, and it has the same hotkeys as VS Code. So they're using a lot of the ones, so you don't have to totally rethink your whole world when it comes to IDEs. I can just take a look, and if I want to do something in line, and I can grab the text and I can hit, Control and Enter, and I can do a transform there, and I can actually see what are the tokens on this, and then I can have it do the work. So there's the inline stuff, which we're used to, but then what's different is here on the right, you have these contexts, is what they call them. And there's a key difference here. It was a little confusing for me to understand when I first was going through the assistant stuff, but you have this AI assistant panel, so you can create the chats, manage the interactions, yada, yada, yada. You have the inline assistant, which we just talked about with just Control Enter. Then you can actually do all the configuration you want to do, and then contexts. So contexts are really just like past conversations that you've had that can then be loaded into new conversations. So they make a distinct difference there, where it's like contexts are like conversations. It's a collaborative tool for sharing information between you, your project, and the model. And the model can reference content from your active context in the assistant panel, but elsewhere like the inline assistant. So these are all saved. And again, all fast. I've noticed with Cursor, I have to go back and I'm deleting them to make sure the thing's still quick. None of that's the case here. So all those end up getting put in this history panel. So on the right-hand side, when I do Command R, that opens up the window. And The basic UI is I can either create a new context, which is basically a conversation that has all the history. I can look at the history. So if I wanted to load one of these into the next session, I can do that. I have a prompt library. This is great. This is one of the best features because I can just bring these in anywhere. I can reference these all the time. So instead of me having an Obsidian doc with all of them or an Obsidian folder or a bunch of text expanders, I have my library right in here. And I think this is one of the game changers because I can load all of these in here. Again, it's showing me all the stuff that I would expect to see as a developer in one of the playgrounds and like the token count. I think that's really helpful. So I can start putting all these in here. They're searchable. You can create more of them. And then you have the configure session or view, which this is a big one. So they've introduced their own model and it's just called ZAI and they're giving it out for free right now. So this is another reason why I find it really helpful. And they've taken the latest Claude 3.5 Sonnet and tuned it. It's crazy. It's crazy good. And it's free right now. So that's a big deal. And if you wanted to, you can use something else, but I'm not. I'm using Zed, which is just Sonnet 3.5 tuned. And that's really great. So if I wanted to create a new context, you'll see it's loading. This is one thing that I was like kind of confused about where I tried to load one in, but it doesn't seem to want to work. But you have these commands. And so if I do /, then I'm immediately shown all the different commands that they have in here. And they're adding more of them. So you have insert file. So if I wanted to work on the index.tsx, which is on the left-hand side, there's a couple ways that I can get it in there. I can either grab the file and then do Command Shift right arrow and put it in there. And then what it's actually doing is it's putting that in a code fence. So it's taken that, it's put it in there, and that's really helpful because then I can change it if I wanted to. It's not just this tag. And again, it was really fast. If I wanted to, let's say I wanted to open up a couple more windows, like the login and the pricing and privacy, whatever. Then I can just do / and then I can do file. And then I can tag more of them. If I wanted to do tab, I can do tab. And that just takes the original one. I can do tab, and then I can do tab all. And then it brings in all of them again. So it's really pretty helpful in that way, where you're just doing it quick and you get fast. So if I wanted to bring in documentation, I can do a fetch. So if I do fetch space, and then let's say I had some Stripe docs or something, like let's just pull up Stripe docs. 1 second. Get started with payments. Okay, so I grabbed a link, and then I can just hit that. Now it's bringing that in. So it has all these really cool commands. I can do diagnostics, which is all the errors. I can include warnings if I want. I can do the specific path of the diagnostics I want. The terminal, all these are really helpful. You can do now, so it can know if you're doing date-related things. You can insert the prompt from the library that you had. So you can start to see when you have these commands how powerful it really becomes. So then if I wanted to, let's say, for our example, I want to say, what could we change here on this index? And by the way, that was the command palette. So that's Command P, and it's just opening it up very fast again. If I wanted to do the settings, I can do Shift Command P, and then you can actually control the assistant. You have all of these different options in here. It's really, really, really cool. So if I just say on the index, is that the right one? Yeah, if I just, let's just do something simple like change the colors to dark mode. Now, as I'm editing here, when I hit enter, I can just create more lines. If I wanted to do more commands, I can do those. Each command has to be on its own line. If I wanted to insert that selection, that was one of the things that I did earlier with the Command Shift right arrow. But then I just send that off, and now it's cooking. So I'm getting back the information from the assistant. One thing that I would say is a con is most people are used to using the assistant on the right side and then having the ability just to kind of have it apply the change. But this is not the case here. So instead, you're actually looking at it and then you can bring that in. Or what they recommend on the site is that then you would do command enter here and say apply the changes and bring in the context. But, I haven't gotten that to work. Like it says that if I do command question mark for context, that it's going to bring that in. But I don't know. That's one of the cons is I've been using it where I have it give me the output and then I'm just pasting it in there. I know that they had a feature in a previous version called workflow that would go and do it similar to how you would expect in Composer, but that's one thing that I don't quite understand just yet. So it generates the changes there. One thing that I find really helpful as well is if I start doing a conversation or a context and I start to get a response, I can actually escape it. So if halfway through here I don't like what it's doing, I can just hit escape and it's just done. Like it's cut off. And that's not the case with cursor. It's, it'll start chugging along. You might get the beach ball. And that allows you to steer this better. So this whole thing is editable, both the outputs and the inputs. And I get the live update of the tokens. It also renamed the context so that context always has a fresh name based on what we're talking about. So if I wanted to bring this into the next chat, then I could do so. So I think that's helpful as well because I can kind of change history and how it's written. So that's really cool. I think that that's going to be helpful. One thing that is also good on the AI side is the diagnostics I kind of mentioned before, but you actually get a screen that's dedicated to it. So this is similar if you've used like Xcode. I think they do this in other IDEs like IntelliJ. But you have one screen for all the problems. So it's not just this thing at the bottom that's a little panel. It actually brings all of them in. And that's helpful because you can see from project level like what's going on, where are the errors. And then you can do that multi-file buffer. You can also do the outline view that will be dynamic to the errors that you do have. And it just makes you move a little quicker. And one of the things that might be controversial is this collab panel. So a lot of people like, I accidentally opened this. I'm like, where am I? And it's funny because this is basically like a Zoom channel. Like this is kind of like Discord. They didn't want to do Discord. They just built it in. So if I wanted to, I could join this and start talking to this guy Anders who's working on bugs. I could also see the chat. So there's people chatting about stuff. And it's really funny because everyone's just confused about what this thing is. And then there's notes that are associated with the channel. So because it's open source, a lot of people are in here and you can learn about how the product's being built. So I don't know if this will stick, but I think it's interesting. And ESLint is one of the things that this gets confused by, the diagnostics. So that's something to keep in mind. But I think overall that this is going to be really interesting to watch. I think I'm making the full switch. I think the only thing that's blocking me on that is just the kind of the gap between the assistant panel and then making the changes. But I found that the outputs were actually really, really good. And again, it doesn't crash. So that's there. And then let's see, what are we talking about next? Oh, the big prompt library. So this is the second piece of news I want to cover. This is a collection of prompt system prompts and LLM instructions. And in here, you just have a bunch of the different popular prompts. So you can see when you come in here, that this guy's basically like come up with a bunch of the different prompts. You somehow figured them out. Some of them are older than others, but you can see what the Perplexity desktop system prompt is. And I don't think you'd necessarily use this in place of these products, but you can see how they do it. Like this is the cursor one. So you can see how they're making it work. Same thing with the Microsoft Copilot. That one's a lot older. They have Anthropics. They have OpenAI's, Perplexities. This is just really cool to see because prompting is one of the biggest keys to making these things effective. One of the things that a lot of people are finding is this Bolt product is able to make clones of things really quickly. Now, I think it's interesting, but if you actually read the code, the quality is, it's controversial. From what I've seen, it generates a lot of spaghetti, and it's a clear product that they're trying to just get you into this instant dev products area. So I think it's good for a lot of people that are very beginner because you could type in like make Spotify clone and it'll go and it'll do that and it'll generate a lot of stuff. It reminds me more of like Replit and their agents where they're trying to make the full stack thing and it deals with the package dependencies. And I think that's great, but I think you lose a lot of control. I think that you can't do as much tweaking as you'd like. Something about running the IDE in the browser to me just doesn't jive well. And when I tried to get all the stuff out of the Blitz or Bolt when I was doing it, it wasn't that great. So I think this is just for a different type of developer. I think it's interesting, something to keep an eye on for sure, but I don't necessarily love it. And that's all I have to say about that. So the next thing I want to cover is just Warp. When it comes to terminals, if you're using the terminal every day, a lot of people don't like that you have to have a login for one, but I don't pay a dime for this, and it's really helpful because I can use natural language. So if I just type in Command I, then I can start typing things in natural language. Now, this is really helpful if you have to do any sort of like, maybe like a system-wide find where you're like trying to do a telescope search across, or you're trying to write a bash script, or you're trying to do anything like, how do I run a migration in Supabase? I haven't used Supabase in a while. It'll run a search for Supabase docs. Most of the time it won't even have to do that. It'll just give you what you're trying to do. But I can just start typing and it'll go and do that. And it'll bring up the assistant. I can also attach a context, so it has attached context. And I don't have to do Command I all the time. Like if I just start typing and it's clear that this is not a shell command, then it will automatically kind of flip on that little toggle there. And next up, this is pretty interesting. So Anthropic strengthens the U.S. intelligence. Strong opener. So they're partnering with Palantir. Now, Palantir is the big boy in the room when it comes to private defense and intelligence. And so this is a big deal. So what they're saying is that the makers of the Claude chatbot, they partnered with the big data analytics firm Palantir as well as AWS. So they're giving U.S. intelligence defense agencies access to its models to boost operational efficiency across departments and help them make better, more informed decisions. That's awesome. That's great. Couldn't be better timing, in my opinion, for this to be happening. And I found this interesting just from a geopolitical standpoint. We just had the election and a lot of things are shifting. And I think that this will affect the way that we pick the tools we use as developers, because you have one side, which is the office that just came into power with Trump, and you have him partnering. Basically, he's got Elon in his family photos. So I think that, you had Sam Altman going to Washington about a year ago, and they was trying to put a bunch of laws in place and trying to basically get legal capture. And his backers were really big about that. You have Vinod from Khosla Ventures, Vinod Khosla, talking about, how would you deal with the Manhattan Project? If we open source that would be horrible. And he's comparing nuclear weapons from World War II to an LLM. And I think that that's just fear-mongering so that they have defensibility. It's a moat. Like, there's no bigger moat than a legal moat, because if you get it done and you have legislative capture around your industry, I mean, that's just a crazy amount of power and influence. So something like this happening and something like this recent election really does kind of change things on what we will be using long term for frontier models, because Elon just unlocked, he has 14 departments that have been holding back his companies. So, famously, he got a rocket built and ready to launch faster than the U.S. Department of whoever it was, one of them, could approve him. And now, with him putting $130 million to work through the Trump campaign and being part of the family photos and helping with that, it's the biggest return on investment possible because he's not going to have any legislative issues. He'll be able to move quickly. I don't think he's going to do any sort of capture either. And I think this is a big sign. Why was it Anthropic over OpenAI? How'd they get that contract? Well, I think it's because Palantir is very open to open source. They're open to working with people that don't have bad intention. They want to work with the best. We know that Anthropic is the best right now when it comes to coding and code generation and big data, I would assume. Whereas OpenAI maybe is lagging a little bit. So I think that's interesting. I think that we're going to have to keep an eye on XAI and what they're doing because they stood up a larger data center than anybody in 17 days. And there's a clip of Jensen Huang, however you say his last name, from NVIDIA talking about how ridiculous it is that Elon was able to get together with Larry Ellison and Michael Dell to put together this supercompute infrastructure. And they did it in 17 days, and usually that takes years. So I would be keeping an eye on them too. That's something that you can do as a developer is you can get, I think they're giving like $25 in credits out for the XAI stuff. It's not, the $300 from Google, but I haven't personally used the model yet, but they're saying by December that it's going to be at the same level as GPT 4.0, which is huge in terms of timeline because it took years and years and years for OpenAI to get there. It's taken just about a year for XAI to get there. So that's on there. One of the questions they had is like, is Amazon holding Anthropic to ransom? Who knows? Not sure. But yeah. And then last, I want to cover just some stuff on the agents. So when it comes to agents, let's open up this project. Agents are basically individual files that can do a task really well. And I think that it can get a little confusing because some people try to stuff too much stuff. They try to give an agent too much responsibility, whereas multi-agentic workflows are much more effective. And I want to walk through one that I did for a real business use case that I made over the weekend. So the use case was I was doing some work. I was doing an audit on a friend's application. He needs some dev help, and I was there to help. And it took a lot of time. It took 6-8 hours to put together this audit, this whole like report of like where is the state of your product. And then involved going through all the screens and screenshotting them and then putting them into Whimsical and writing the notes about them and then doing some SEO stuff, running Lighthouse, running the detailed extension to figure it out, checking for errors, actually running the project. And afterwards, I was like, that just took too long. There's got to be a better way I could make an agent for this. And that's where this idea came into play with this site auditor. And so what it does from a high level is it uses a bunch of different tools to go out and do everything that I did manually, but in like a minute, and actually do more than what I did. So from a high level, it's doing visual testing where it's using the ability to basically capture screenshots of every single view that is available that's not behind auth. And you can do this, including auth, by the way. But I didn't have support for that because this is just a Saturday project. But it does the visual testing, so it's going and it's snapping photos of every single view for full screen page widths, page heights on desktop, tablet, and phone. And that's important. And then it's going and it's actually doing a performance analysis. So it's running page speed insight stuff, how fast things load. It's also doing behind the scenes, it's doing SEO audits. So you can get domain authority, you can do page authority, you can do accessibility evaluations. So that's something that people really don't think about a lot, but Google dings you on it and it makes the HTML better. It's semantic. So things like the screen reader text that no one thinks about. It does security scanning. It also does SEO optimization. So the whole thing here was this agent basically has a bunch of the different files in it, and it generates a report at the end. So it's a CLI. And in the CLI, I can basically select what are the things that I want this to do. And I can hit the space bar for all of them. So if I don't want the screenshots or I don't want one piece, then I can unselect it. And then the argument that you pass is just a URL. So I could go, and if my friend was like, hey, my site needs some help, what's wrong with it? Or if I was running a consulting agency, I could do a list of these things. I could do an array of URLs and have it generate reports and have it actually, the output is not only a giant glob of JSON that we send off to Anthropic with a prompt for both the report of a customer, but also a report of what the developer would do to make it better. So it's doing all those steps, and it's just done by saying, all right, well, we're going to use the Lighthouse and the Chrome launcher, and these are the default categories. We have performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. It has the different screen sizes that we want. And so this would be an example of one agent where it's going and it's doing that. And it's creating this summary at the end. Same thing with the audit progress. So this is just something that's nice with the CLI that I added. This is all just written in JavaScript because TypeScript was being a pain. And again, Saturday project didn't feel like fighting with types. But this is going through and it's saying, okay, well, every 5 minutes or every however many seconds, we're going to be doing some sort of update. So I can see how many pages does this app have? Is it, it's basically for the person that's using it. You have the report generator, which is using Axios and is generating both the dev report as well as a client report and summarizing the audit data. So the output that you get from all these individual tools is basically, like I said, a gigantic raw JSON. And then that gets passed in. We do some averages on it. So if you have a Lighthouse score for 1,000 pages, you don't want to have all those out. And then it gets sent off to Claude with a specific prompt that says, hey, this is what we need to do. Can you figure it out? We're chunking things too. So if you have a really long list, you want to make it smaller. You have the screenshot capture, which I mentioned. You have the framework detector. So this is what I did was I actually had a prompt that I used to reverse engineer Wapalizer. Wapalizer is, I'll just show you. It's an extension for Chrome that shows you the frameworks and all the tools that people are using. So I was like, how does this work? And I basically fed a prompt using Zed saying, hey, look, here's the API. Here's the landing page. Analyze the landing page. Figure out what this thing is doing, what the customer value is, and then analyze the API and the stack using the framework agent and figure out what it does and recreate it. So that was really cool. And then, so you have the framework detector, HTML validator. So there's a lot of stuff that I didn't even know about. Like analyzing the semantic pieces, are you missing things? It's kind of like running a linter on a server, but you don't have access to it. So it's running a linter on public bundle. And then you have security checker. So this is using SSL. Is it, what's your security policy? And then, here's all the utilities that we have for the different options. So I just wanted to show that off a little bit because it was really helpful for me, and I think it gives people an idea of what these agents can be used for. This one's headless, so it's it doesn't have a UI, but then you'd have a folder for each URL that you pass, and then the test, so you can take a look at it before and see if it was good or not. And then you have the giant file that's actually doing the work. So that is one of the agents, and I think it's really cool. And so that's the video for today. I hope you guys found this helpful. There was a lot of different stuff. If you guys have anything that you want me to cover, one thing that I made a video about already this week was the new model that Claude came out with, Haiku. I didn't find it very helpful. I think it's great that there's a new model out, but I didn't find it helpful. And I think that the ones right now to be keeping your eyes on are obviously everyone's waiting for 01 to drop. We've had the preview, but I'm still using that as chain of thought for architecting and figuring out plans. So that one's something to keep an eye on for 01. And then anything that drops from XAI or Claude moving forward is definitely something to pay attention to. These are weekly videos where I do stuff like this, and I sit down, and it's going to be every Friday. So if you like the video, make sure you like it, do your good deed for the day, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.